Um, cool. Otherwise, today we will just discuss some, trying to sort of like bring us a level up from, music and AI or the technical stuff or, all the application we've seen. What are some of the other concerns, but also application or limitations or, interesting future direction opportunities this is a very fast evolving field. So, oftentimes, every year I have to update the slides. That's my destiny. But, that's sort of how interesting this field is. So I guess, so I guess first just to reflect, what is AI? We talk about this, system that think like humans, act like humans, think rationally or act rationally, but think about for music. In this context, what are we really trying to do? Some people view it as a tools, where these are just tools, and we are just trying to use these tools to do something interesting. But think about an AI researcher, why we are interested in it, the idea of artificial intelligence is about automation, but also query about what intelligence means. So at the same time, there's also this perspective of like, okay, then can we use these model, think about the transformer case, where you look at those transformers, attention mechanism, or you look at the diffusion model, how they compose the structure from, rough shape all the way to finer structure. Does it mimic something our human brains is doing, or it doesn't, or does it reflect something more than, the typical way of how we understand human intelligence? So I think there's like so many different perspectives surrounding this idea of AI. And especially in music, there's much more because music is sort of very emotionally grounded. And that's something oftentimes very overlooked in current AI paradigm, which is very hard. And, people talk about, this kind of embodied intelligence, which means that these AI has to be in real life. It does know how the world, common knowledge, word system, these agents should be sort of like your partners. But think about how far away that is from current AI to some, your partner musicians that understand music and talk with you in the same language or through music. There's so many things that's being not being currently modeled in these AI paradigm, or more specifically, the reason machine learning paradigm. There's far more beyond that. So we talk about this. What is your expectation of a real AI? We did some vote. Unanimously, I remember that most people vote for the same thing. What do you think now?
It seems like interpretability isn't always the requirement. We don't really mind if it doesn't behave like a human,
Mhm.
except for us, like say.
Yeah,
So knowing how to think is very useful, I guess. Like
but it's not a must.
having some sort of selection, but it doesn't need to
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, that's essentially our vote is about, it doesn't need to know how to think, but at the same time, now you've gone through all these AI models. Now you will recognize there's some needs to know how these AI models think. Because of, if you do want to treat as a partner, if you do want to understand, yourself, part of the, modern art and modern music is about challenging the idea of, what art is, what music is. But at this process of working with AI, some of the very interesting inquiries raise up because, now you're thinking about, well, these model doesn't really think, and they're generating these stuff and what's going on. But at the same time, how do you know they are not thinking? So, a lot of interesting question just um, if evoked because of there's this idea of like, does AI need to know how to think, or it doesn't has to know how to think? But at the same time, it's like there's are different perspectives, much more complex than that. And yeah, doesn't need to behave like a human. I think this is a much easier ones. It would be cool, we have human like AIs, but at the same time, for now, at least based on our limitations, none of the models are behaving like humans, pretty much most of the case. Um, what's your opinion? Is current music AI more capable than you thought?
absolutely like that.
Really? Okay, cool.
sometimes it just can generate music that like
Yeah,
has a
yeah.
similar vibe to something I've listened to, and then like all the other like the generative AI like competition, like that one,
Yeah, yeah.
that was very surprising, like
Yeah.
how similar to other genres I've listened to in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 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 definitely. Yeah. But I think the music, like AI song contest, is also like human being intelligent of using these tools. So yeah. So I guess the question, music AI more capable is like, AI song contest is a very interesting way. It's like even these models might generate, random stuff, but how do you, extract something that's meaningful from that? I guess that's also something we could learn from this process. And that's a lot of like art form, basically, emerging from that by, misusing these kind of models. We would talk about that later. Think about DJ scratching. It's like, it's not supposed to be like that. And, think about distortion. Electronic guitar at the beginning is trying to mimic the acoustic guitar sounds. And then later, like, well, we just failed to do that. There's no way we can mimic it. And then people realize, well, but this is like a very interesting expression that we can use. And then now distortion become the signature of, electric guitar. So I guess that's also part of the process of that. Um, Cool. So I guess these are some of the questions likely after homework 3 or 4, three, like AI song contest you might have in your mind. But I think it's like even for me, like after working on this for years, still I'm keep thinking about what are the definition. And these definitions actually change over time. To what extent of human involvement can a song still be called AI music? So if you look at AI song contest, the definition change every year. So 2020, I guess in first place, they want more human involvement. Of course, it's not like, it's not like a Suno competition where, you just type and then you get something. Like try 1,000 times and then you become like a judge on those outputs. But rather, how can human be part of it? But at the same time, it's like, I think there's a very nice quote about electronic music and AI music is that only until the time we no longer talk about computer music, electronic music, but we talk about what this music is, what is the genre, what is the idea behind that. That's when we call this technologies to be mature enough. So the same as the AI music. Now we are listening to some of the music because they are AI music. But at some point, if this technology become mature enough, then people will be like, oh, this is, interesting music. This is like a, blah 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 music rather than this is AI music. It's sort of like, people no longer say, well, I want to go to that cool computer music concert. It's like, well, it's part of the music creative process. So I guess at some point it will become like that, but to what extent for now and how does that evolve over the time? Any thought?
I wonder like if like people should like I guess cite their use of AI like as
Hmm.
like assignments. Like, make sure you say that you use ChatGPT.
I
Like, is it important that people disclose like the AI's involvement
think
because
about,
that
yeah,
finds the line.
yeah.
Looking at the
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I read a lot of like things surrounding this, and I think there are like two things to consider. One is like how this is different from sampling,
yeah,
right? But the difference, I mean, the similarity is that well, sampling, you are not doing that. You are just, referencing to that or grabbing that in an interesting way. So that's the same for AI music. It's like, well, this is partly generated by AI, so it's fine. You still have some credit on putting that. If it's, part of a larger composition, you still get credits on that, and that part is not generated by you. But sampling is different because that's existing songs and you reference it based on some contextual decisions. So you have like societal or cultural different kinds of perspective, but that's missing in AI. And that's one thing. The second thing is about authorship. It's like, why do we go to concerts? Why do we listen to music? At some point, it's like, down to the earth is the emotion connection to, the creators, the composers. So part of this very interesting discussion that people have done a lot of time is that, when you tell someone fake it like this is AI generated song, fake it as human composed songs, then you sort of like throw yourself. And sometimes if you thought it was a human written songs, but in the end, turn out it's a AI generated songs, people feel deceived. So that process, like why do we have that emotion evoked? It's because we are throwing ourselves into like, how was this, music being composed? What are the, scenarios, environments, background that leads to this composition? And I guess that's missing in AI music, but it's not like it's just missing in AI music. It's like if it's just a text prompt, then it's missing. But think about now, the line kind of become blurry, where part of it is AI, a lot of decision could be semi-automized, and you know, the down to the earth, I think the most important part is still how human make the decisions. And if everything is made by AI, I guess it's just less interesting, I guess, in general, to think about what it is. I mean, it's interesting to see how these AI behave, where at the same time, it's like you lack that connection between humans to human.
It's
Yeah.
interesting, like the idea that society, like human society, created the training data and
Yeah.
also created the AI model. So in
Yeah.
a way, even if we hand over like a lot of responsibility to our model, like it's still like human in a way.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. That's a very interesting question because there's another like piece of article that's basically saying the same idea is that ChatGPT could be the most unbiased representation of, common human or English speaking common, you know, I don't know. It's like the centroid of human um, beings using the same language. And people always like, these are biased content. But at the same time, it's like, potentially these machine learning model is is like the data-driven, unbiased way of, representing the world. So it's always this trade-off. It's like, well, you want to remove the bias. You do know there are some bias, these are, online forums and not all the text will be there. And it's not the, like a uniform distribution of like sampling of like humans language, but at the same time based on that data set it's sort of like a very unbiased way of representation of that language as a database. So I guess that's sort of the same idea. Is like, well, who knows, and how to define whether it's biased or unbiased. I think that's depends a lot on how you view this question. Yeah. So yeah, it's sometimes also interesting, to look at these models. Like, well, if you want to do like Java specific generation model, or you just do, I have a big model and I just train all the data, and now what will be the centroid of this data set? Like looking at the centroid is also sometimes also very interesting to look at those things. But at the same time, the diversity and the representation of the distribution is also something that is very important. Cool. Shall we intervene if AI generated material doesn't sound polished? I mean, likely in AI song contests, you will see a lot of these examples. It's like sometimes you want, sometimes you don't want it. I mean, that's sort of the iconic features of, AI music. Then why shouldn't you keep it? It's sort of like distortion. I mean, in the past, people might think that those are not guitar sounds, but now it's like I want it. I mean, that's the way I want it to sound like. So, shall we intervene? I guess this also something that will change over time as this technology evolve. I guess the last question, like a very weird question, is like, what is the goal of AI music? Um, yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about, these AI tools for generating music, but I guess more broadly, why should we automate this process? Um, I don't really know. I mean, but I guess, there's a common quote about, we don't want AI to do, you know, replace us to do art. I want them to do laundry. But, think about, creating music. Are there parts of these processes like tedious, boring, and you want to leave more space for, your creativity to flourish? And can you sort of like remove those hurdles creating music? So, a lot of my research are hopefully in the future will be sort of like thinking about, DAW, like how do you learn DAW or, learn to use a DAW, how do you learn to, use Max MSP. So these are, or, think about coding, then, how do you write C++? Then, Python would be easier, but still you'd have to code. But nowadays, now vibe coding, it provides a way that you can enter this field much easier, but at the same time, in the end, you still have to learn it. But hopefully, it will be a much easy, lower entry of barrier. So that's my personal take. Any thought?
Like there's a lot of like things surrounding the creative process, like transcribing,
Mhm.
like like scripting out like a melody, like
Yeah,
starting
yeah,
from
yeah.
scratch. Like, a lot of those sorts of things, like AI can be used as like a tool to like help
Hmm.
start the creative process or help like accompany it. Um, and I guess also like maybe things like elevator music or like
Yeah.
one-off like commercials. Like if you
Hmm.
just want more of like a generic sort of sound, you're not necessarily like being like ultra creative with it.
Yeah.
And so in cases like that, like being able to have a model that creates something that's like good enough sort of is pretty useful.
Yeah.
Like kind of replacing the artist, but maybe not in like cases where it's like the
Hmm.
most important. It's,
Yeah. I think there's also another perspective that sometimes overlooked. It's like, um, if you're doing AI music like automatic and if these model can sort of like mimic your own composition, potentially makes kind of exclaim that potentially you're not working hard enough or you're not trying to challenge the boundary enough that you're still at the centroid. So not saying centroid is bad, but I guess there's also part of this process of like doing AI music to sort of like do a self-reflection on your own creative process about are we challenging myself well enough or how does AI music as an enemy of your own self and try to improve in a positive way rather than they're just replacing you. If you can be easily replaceable, does that suggest that you should work harder to do something more creative? Who knows? And if there's like so easily like the lounge music or cafe music, airport music, if these music are so easily achievable, will our you know joint standard of music appreciation raise or degrade? Who knows? But I guess there's also some very interesting study on that, because nowadays Spotify, even they don't want to share it publicly, but there's a lot of study on Spotify because there's very hard to detect whether those are AI generated music. So you have to do some study on like author, like composer, and figure out whether they are a real person or fake person. But if you Google like fake Spotify, it is a known big issues where there are tons of fake artists or like AI generated soundtracks on Spotify, and that's potentially taking away real artists revenue. Um, and so that's a real questions. But at the same time, it's like if they are just there and you don't notice, does that means that they passed the Turing test? So there's like different implications, but also concerns surrounding that. Um, yeah, and I always like this, whatever you now find weird, ugly, uncomfortable, and nasty about a new medium will surely become its signature. So this is, talking about, like the good old like LP or, CD tape. They have their own characteristic of sounds, and it will become its signature. So nowadays, people are looking into some iconic analog synthesizers because that has the specific sound. So who knows what will happen for AI music and some of these sounds that we find weird. And the same thing for AI image generation. I usually like those, 3 or 4 years ago, those like very creepy AI generated images. Nowadays, I was like, whenever I prompt it, I was like, okay, cool. This looks too good. It doesn't have that freaky, sloppy vibe. And yeah, I feel like they are less creative in that sense. But compositional um, like capability nowadays, these models are very good. So I guess it's just a trade-off. But I guess this is sort of the way to look into it. It's like, potentially at some point that becomes its signature. Cool. Now we will jump into some of the other topic one by one. So of course we didn't talk about copyright, which is a huge issue, but at the same time, I think this is just to provide you some context about copyright, but also why copyright and how can we potentially approach this. So purpose of copyright, I think this is something sometimes very overlooked. It's like why do we even need copyright? So this is like according to the Copyright Alliance. So the primary purpose of copyright is to induce and reward authors. So, by protecting their property rights, new works and all the other works will. So I guess it's like depends on who you are in this phase. Are you thinking about incentivizing the authors or you're incentivizing the public? You're like a careful balance between the public and the authors. So you want these work to, circulate around, but at the same time you want to protect their rights so that, the artists have the rights and you create a space for that to be protected so that they want to create more arts. Otherwise, um,
Paul, as computers become more and more sophisticated and suck in more and more content that humans have created, the government's got a big decision to take about whether they protect the copyright of musicians, actors, artists. What are you worried about?
Just that. Just worried about the copyrights not being protected. Because if it gets a bit like the Wild West, then the people who created these copyrights don't benefit. And I think that takes away a lot of incentive, because when we were kids in Liverpool, we found a job that we loved, but it also paid the bills. So it allowed us to be creative, more and more creative, go out in the world and bring joy to people and so. So it allowed us to do that. I think if you take that away and they take the incentive away by not protecting the copyrights, I think it'd be a shame. And I think you'd see a loss of creativity, which is a great pity, because that's what brings so much joy to the world.
The Beatles was about music, but also about being able to put food on the table and pay the bills as a young man. What do you think the risk is for the next generation of musicians coming through?
So, for instance, you get young guys, girls, coming up and
I was looking for a quote, but
they write a beautiful song. And
maybe I have a quote. But anyway, so this is like sort of like history of copyright law. So if you're interested in copyright law, is a very big field, and especially nowadays, Gen AI is challenging this definition. But pretty much, in the past, copyright term is only 28 years when it started, 40 years, and then lastly is 75 years is the recent, and recently now it becomes 95 years. For 95 years is for I think anything not music, and now we have like almost 105 years terms, and it depends on the media. But anyway, so now copyright pretty much can cover your whole lifespans. I guess that's the point. So but think about copyright as like again, this like a trade-off between, you want to share it, but at the same time you don't want you want to protect yourself. But think about meme culture and think about sampling. That's sort of the way to look at it. Sampling is like an official way, like a business way. You can definitely earn by, someone sample your music. Then there's a way to do it. But think about meme culture. If you do want to protect all the copyright, then are we not allowed to do meme? So that's one thing. But also think about, portrait versus photography, photography displays realistic portraits, but also freeze portrait painting into new art forms like impressionism and abstract arts. So, copyright is like portrait versus photography is like, think about the original composition or the original arts. And now if you do a reinterpretation of that, um, how does that go into copyright? So how do we balance technical benefits and copyright protections, and those sort of things like that? And where AI music raised the collective standards of music, let's just talk about it. So oftentimes, when you're thinking about copyright, you're thinking about the balance between those two stakeholders. Of course, for music, hopefully, most people are trying to do the correct way. So this is actually a very interesting initiative, Fairly Trained. So this is like a nonprofit organization. They are doing, all the models, if your training data are all certified to be licensed, then you will get this Fairly Trained certified. This initiative is basically explicitly provided to the model developer for the purpose of being used as training data. So all the data has to be in this category, and be available under an open license appropriate to the use case. So the music has to be in one of these. So there's, or, public domain globally. Cool. So these are some of the, fairly trained certified companies, and, some of the bigger companies are not here. But at least they are part of these community trying to do this fairly and, license music. And, for Moises, there are also, if you check Google that, you can also find that there are also all licensed, and hopefully they will also get some certification on that. So these are some of the companies. So if you're worried about, whether your models are, or, data are being trained on certified or licensed audio, then these are some of the companies you can look into, and these are some of the models that you can look into. But I guess in general, there's ongoing discussions on this, very tricky, and a lot of lawsuits recently just still ongoing mostly. But there's changing landscape on this. So how does AI generated music compare to other industry disrupting technologies like recording or music sampling? So recording now differentiate the performance interpretation versus the original composition copyright holders. So now a music or an art could have multiple copyright holders with different rights on different parts of that. And think about music sampling. This has been, an issue, but now, it's more standardized. Now it's part of the business model. If you do music sampling, or if you want to use it in a live performance, then you have to pay the royalty to the company, the copyright holders. Does model training justify fair use? This is one of the biggest issue in this music gen AI versus law thing. So it's like training justify fair use. From what I understand, likely there's no way we can prohibit this. So this will likely be considered fair use in the future. It's just like when where we have a formal decision be made. So this is very tricky. But so this sort of like differentiate music gen AI, the whole system into two sets. First is training, second is inference. So this is asking whether model training justify fair use. So think about what's happening in training. It's like you are listening to all these audio, and so one claim that these companies being sued is saying is that, well, human do the same. Well, human also listen to these music, and by doing this, we are not infringing the copyright holders' rights. But when we try to write something and then we generate something, and that has the same things like copy someone else, then that behavior infringe the copyright. So here is trying to differentiate, model training versus model inferencing. But the other complexity of this is a very complex thing. The other complexity here is that some of the claims is that, these model could potentially be a derivative of your training data. If there's a way that you can prompt your model to get the exact copy of your original data, then your model is technically a derivative of that work. So this is one of the lawsuits, the biggest challenge is that do we have a specific, say, latent or text prompt or latent code that can exactly um, reproduce one of the training data? Then in that sense, then you cannot release this model because this model will be a copyright work. It's sort of like you have a huge slide deck and there's like different, artworks. It's a catalog. Then it becomes something that's not, you are definitely infringing someone's else copyright. So ongoing debate, and technically you have to do some analysis to do it, but at the same time, we don't really know what the results will be. From the machining perspective, it's very, very challenging to see whether, any single image or music can be perfectly reconstructed from these kind of model. But, everything is probabilistic, so there's still a chance. This is actually what I'm talking about. It's a music gen AI model, a derivative for its training data set. So this is essentially what the legal concern around it is about. Can a music gen AI model reproduce its own in its training data set? Any thoughts? Big
So
questions.
derivative is like a copy of like the original work. Like there's derivative and there's like a creative transformation, which is covered under fair use.
Yeah, there's two different questions. Like one is like if it does reproduce, then you're done, pretty much, right? Because think about if you can reproduce, meaning that this is like an algorithm that just it's an MP3 encoded waveform, right? You have a waveform and you say, oh, this is not the same because I'm MP3 encoded, but there's a way you can turn it into that waveform that's exactly the same as your original. So you're infringing their copyright. So now, if this model compress your training data in the different formats into that, then you cannot share that models around, or you cannot do the things because this is infringing their copyright if you want to publish that model or make it public available. So this is part of the discussion, and the creative interpretation of that is another idea that's a little bit. I don't think that's not what the current debate is on, because that happens for non-Gen AI as well. And so the current US system is just like jury will determine whether that's a plagiarism or not, or copyright infringement or not. And there's also some ongoing work trying to mimic this. So think about, well, can we just pseudologically just generate a bunch of different kinds of jewelry and try to mimic this behavior? What's the human standard of plagiarism? What's the human standard of Gen AI versus human? What amounts of human involvements justify that? And this is jury based in these states. So can we sort of get a common standard? Part of that initiative is so that model developers or musicians or some random person want to use these model, have a guide towards like how should I approach and work with these kind of models.
One copyright idea is like where do you draw the line? Like if someone were to copy like what a pop song sounds like and try to release
Yeah.
just I guess doing it on human interpretation, doing a jury and saying, okay, there's like 5 notes, and that's like
Yeah. And usually that takes a lot of like discussion. It's not like, well, they just listen and then just vote. There is usually a lot of discussion, and you want to see how they come up with this and like what's the motivation, or how the rationale of the song's writing process and some context before making a decision. Um, yeah. But I guess this is like ongoing things, and these three are essentially the core debate of these things. And I don't think people really have a concrete answer to any of these questions. And even as a machine learning guy, I guess it's like very low chance, but how do you know? Right. And there's also like a famous one is like Shutterstock. A Getty image actually and Shutterstock both, and there's like one specific image that's essentially the same that like one of the Mid Journey generated, like this person is exactly the same, and they even have the watermark Getty Images. So that's essentially how they started this lawsuit. But at the same time, theoretically versus, realistically, or, how do we model these deep learning models with legal concerns? Yeah. Many lawsuits about Gen AI. So now not all of these are music. So, Times sues, OpenAI, Microsoft, New York Times. But there is also Reddit, but, Warner Bros, those are images of their films or, copyrights. Disney and Universal's, but also music publishers. This one is for the lyrics. But also next you see UMG, Sony, and Warner Bros for Udio and Suno. And, you know, so this is like most recent one, October 2025, so a month ago. So UMG and Udio basically have a settlement finally in the end. So now, as their press release is like the new platform, like Udio will create a new platform which will be launched in 2026, and everything will be trained on authorized and licensed music. And it want to create a license and protect the environment to customize, stream, and share music responsibly on the Udio platform. So this is actually how these, label companies want to do, is sort of like create this garden where, you can only share your music within, and everything is copyrighted. So, these tech company has to work with them. So I think that's a good way to do it. And, think about visual artists. At some point, in the past, people are like hating these music label companies because, there are three big ones, and people are like, well, now are artists even being powered by these labor companies, or these labor companies are just becoming too big. But at the same time, think about visual artists, community, that they don't have this infrastructure of lawyers to protect them. And think about music and film industry. We have a very strong, business model and copyright detection models with fingerprinting, watermarking, and all these things to protect them. And so now, actually, in this Gen AI wave of copyright infringement, actually, music and film industry is much more protected to some extent. So, basically we'll create a walled garden, and they will use fingerprinting, filtering, and other measures that, we do talk a little bit about it in our class. If you're interested in, this is a very nice forum, purely mostly laws, but I think it's very nice to think about, what's the difference between, how these things become very complex in legal terminology. Cool. So ethical considerations. So, ethics versus laws is definitely, ethics is doing more than law requires and less than the law allows. So, there's different initiatives. So this is one of them. I just, grab it, but, more like how we should use these ethical principles to guide our way to look into, Gen AI, but also, especially for music Gen AI. So, some of the concerns, this is by a study, and those Wesson, but loss of agency of authorship. We talked a little bit about it. By using these Gen AI, where am I? Am I the author of the outputs? How can I see myself in that outputs? So there are some way you can potentially solve this by improving controllability or improving interactions between these models. But in general, you don't want the loss of agency of authorship. And creativity stifling. So it's sort of like create this bound of creativity. You are keep working with these models. So this doesn't happen just for Gen AI. So think about search engine. Does that sort of like these platform holders, are they sort of like blocking your access to other knowledge that's not reachable from your search engine? Or think about ChatGPT or Gemini. You're talking with these models to get knowledge, so they sort of control the knowledge that you can see. So And in the creative space is that like now you are working with these models. If these models are trained with a specific bias or specific boundaries, then you are sort of limited in being limited in that space. Predominance of Western bias, especially, nowadays, this is a larger issue in that, if you're thinking about audio-based models, then, pretty much you can do all kinds of audio models if you have the data. But at the same time, most of the data is Western focused. But if you think about symbolic music, then it's even worse because Western music notation, lots of technologies being developed for Western music notations. But what about other music that cannot be represented in Western music notation? So, they lack the infrastructure, these technology infrastructure to do interesting work. So that's one of the concerns. Copyright infringement, we just talked about it. Cultural appropriation, generating models much easier to just do something that's, just mimic that without knowing all the context. So this is another, ethical implication. And also for speech, the same idea. So these are for music Gen AI, but speech Gen AI, phishing and fraud, misinformation and defects. These are likely much easier to get a sense. Security and privacy, non-consensual use or biometric data. So in different fields, there are different consideration. And in homework one, we basically look at this, and at some point, music potentially will reach the stage where it's a little bit tricky to see whether those are real or not. And the Drake, yeah. So this one is the famous one because a lot of people thought it was a Drake song, and the other song is a real Drake song. So I go to Spotify and I just pick the one that's with the least listens. And yeah, I've seen, on Grayscope, I've seen lots of people are like, I'm not quite sure about this one. I never heard of these. So that's one thing that's tricky is like, the least popular song of your and versus like an AI generate cliche of your style. Goodness. So this like actually become very famous. This like Ghost Rider 977, so it becomes a huge things at that time. Um, and a lot of people thought it was real Drake. Um, anyway, so you see that point. Cool. These are some of the papers if you want to dig into this. A lot of discussion on, ethical different dimensions, but also diversity or, decentering the West. Lots of things. And also on diversity specifically, this is a big issue in music information retrieval because a lot of these technology are built upon, Western notations, but also Western centric modeling of the music. Environmental concerns, people talk a lot about it, especially nowadays we have IPSI, the data centers. There are 6 data centers in this year proposed in Michigan. So, and I don't know where it will end up like, but it's happening everywhere. And Virginia is, the biggest, data centers. Amazon is sort of like the capital of data centers, but all the other, places. So GPU energy consumptions. I just want to give you some rough numbers to give you an idea. Of course, nowadays bigger GPUs. Of course, so A100 is sort of like 3 years ago the best, or 2 years ago the best. So now it's likely double or 1.5 times more. But you can think about this as like a GPUs, multiple GPUs. So each of these server is like 2 to 6 kilowatt. So how does that compare? Microwave 10 1K ish. So you can roughly see that it's actually much, and you are constantly running these GPUs if you are sending requests. But at the same time, if these are parallelizing, if you're sending batch parallelization, it could reduce the per token or, per generation consumption. And there's a lot of ongoing research initiatives to trying to see, hopefully in the future is like, you are on Google Flies, you can search for a Google, you can search for fly and you see the carbon footprint. And in the future, hopefully we will see the carbon footprint for, every single, round. It's like, well, I asked this question, how much, carbon footprint that corresponds to something we know about. So that's sort of the idea. But this is, the 2022nd. This is like a very, very tiny LLM by today's standards. So 176 billion parameters. Nowadays, easily 3 trillion, 10 trillion, 20 trillion parameters. So this is like back then, one of the bigger model that academia can still train. So it spanned, these kind of 118 days, and the total number of GPU hours is like this. So they are using a lot of GPUs at the same time. So this in comparison, a household power usage is only 10.5 million watts per year, and you are seeing the total energy being used here is for 430 million watts hour. The unit is a little different. So, it's basically a household for 40 plus years. So training one single this model, even though, once you train this model, you can inference it, you only do the training once, or, development maybe potentially several times, but this is most likely, one shot or a few shot only. But still, it's like a household for 40 plus years, or 40 plus household for a year. And this is still, the pre-ChatGPT era, where, they are comparing, GPT-3, that's the model, 175, that's why they choose 176. And OPT, likely you don't know none of these, because, these are the academic models, or, back then the industry models. But nowadays it's much, much larger. And rapidly growing need. This is last year's news. Elon Musk, the XAI colossal, and Meta is also building something. And of course, now in Michigan, there's tons of that, in Michigan. So the Los Alamos one in Ipsy, and there's also OpenAI and Oracle, and also this also like DTA also planned in the whole Midwest region to increases their power supply, because the need is growing rapidly. So this is like back in 2022. So this is like 2026 estimate. Data centers worldwide will sort of like become the fifth largest consumption for all the different countries. And you can see the data center energy is growing rapidly. So I guess the point is, this is happening, and data center is not just only being used by these Gen AI tools. Whenever you want to do something, or Google Files, all my stuff is on Google Drive. So some of these data centers are actually storing your data, but there's also data centers nowadays are actually AI centers more likely. So these energy concern is a big issue, but there's also tons of like green AI initiative, or trying to think about edge computing. Are there other workaround that if we do want this technology that is actually improving our productivity, but can we make it more efficient? So that's something we should also take into account when we are doing research or using these tools. I don't think I will be able to finish it anyway. Cultural concerns, global divide in AI music data sets. This striking fact. The data sets, if you look at the red is like more, and the blue ones are less. And so, highly centralized for European and American data sets. You see that American data set is much lower, because it defines the genre as the root of that the root sort of like region of that genre. So a lot of those will be European rooted. So that's part of the reason. But you can see that, a lot of Asian, African, and basically the global South is pretty much overlooked in that case. So this is another case. Look into all the conferences on their submission on all the different genres and regions. So you can also see that huge divide. So implication, limiting global South creativity. So, if these models are always generating those, music of someone else music, or not representative for yourself, then potentially you're limits the potential for these genres to evolve or adapt in the digital age. Economic disparities, think about these tools, think about recommendation system. If these recommendation system have a systematic bias towards certain genres or certain regions, then potentially they will create a very bad bias, and downplay the importance of certain regions' music. Reinforcement of the existing biases. So this is the thing we just discussed on the Reddit, or the music genre central things. Is this something we want? I mean, there's biases, and our goal is to remove those biases as uh, you know as possible. But at the same time, if we don't do enough, then those biases will be reinforced again and again. Cultural erosion, certain genre, it has a centuries old traditions, philosophy, and if we don't have these, AI infrastructure or digital infrastructure, then they might be fade from the public mind. Some recommendation by the paper authors: explicit mention of genres of model limitations, which people should do. Avoid generation when uncertainty exists. Investing on inclusive data sets. Transfer learning for underrepresented styles. This is very cool. And think about personalization. Think about future learning. Think about all sort of machine learning paradigm beyond just building big data sets. Inclusive evaluation. This is so important. So this is one example that I think is very cool. I don't have time to go into details, but this is reviving Korean core music with AI. So there's tons of like Korean core music, and there's pair score, and they know how they sounds like, but there are like two pieces. No one's know how to play them. So this work is trying to sort of like, can we sort of use the other pieces that we know how the music work for those scores? Can we revive those two missing pieces? So they do a lot of, transformer per MLM, and they do optical music recognition. This is the original melody. So you see these characters that actually correspond to pitches and duration. This is so these correspond to this. So each block, they will have different positions. So lin an. So basically these words will be the two pitch, and these are with the precision encodes the durations. So these are the duration. When you place them in different positions, they correspond to different things. So basically, you can turn that into a score. And so you can actually make six dragons fly again. I love this paper. This won the best paper.
정대협과 보태평은 지금 현재 종묘 재래악으로 전승되고 있습니다. 그 음악을 온전히 세계적인 큰 공연 조선
Actually collaborate with the National Hangul Center, which is the Korean traditional music center, to do this performance. So they play, scores that we don't know how to play it, but at the same time, these are, AI restoration of the original, which is pretty cool. I don't have time, but feel free to explore it. Yeah, which is very cool. And I hope to see more of music like this, more research like this kind is like so, I don't know, I just feel like this is what AI should be doing rather than just doing random music generation. This is fascinating. Questions? Me? I'm doing OMR-ish is sort of similar. I'm doing some work on Jianzipu, which is like a Chinese Guqin notation, which has a very similar things, but I just had a meeting with the students. But it's a little bit also different is that we can talk offline, but I mean, Jianzipu is also very interesting because I guess the bigger picture here is that oftentimes when we are looking into these low resource music notation or think about low resource languages, the question is not about the model. It's like oftentimes in machine learning is like, well, we have the model and we build this model, model A, model B, bigger model, better model, assuming that we have a big data set. But all of these, humanities questions, interesting questions, or historical, significant questions is that we don't really have that much data, or we do have the data, but it's very hard to annotate those. So part of these processes is how do you make this annotation or process more efficient? Can we use AI to facilitate some of these annotation process, and can we use AI to do some of the tasks that researchers want to look into these research? Yeah. So I guess that's the way to look at it. And I think it's sort of, sort of like jump into the field and then people are like, cool, I know that models, I know that model. But anyway, I don't have the data. That's the point. So I guess that's also one thing when you start to work with these data is that oftentimes, if you apply for a grant and you get a grant, cool, you can do it. But oftentimes it's like, how do you even get the data to get started with? So a lot of more infrastructure about how do you potentially make it much more easier to get these data or, do the annotation or, fusion learning, transfer learning, or kind of more data efficient ways to do it. Yeah. So I guess that's the goal toward that. And this again, very cool. This is like Gen AI. Of course, what I just said is not Gen AI-ish. It's more like, analytic, but Gen AI could also be used in very cool way. Next few slides, I don't have time, but challenges of AI music, but at the same time, these are just opportunities actually. The five challenge I will fast forward these likely representation. We talk a lot about this. We have the paradigms of symbolic music, audio, domain music generation, so MIDI, piano roll, waveform versus spectrogram, right? So we can see it with this music sales attention things that you see these kind of things that make sense for music generation or music modeling. And you can actually also analyze whether these models are actually working. So this is sort of like doing a statistical analysis on music self-attention. And this is basically showing that this is one of the model we trained. So these model attends more to notes that are 4n beats away in the past. So this is interesting because, think about what does that mean? So in your data set, it's actually dominated by 4/4 time music. And so the model specifically, the display is so pathetic. There are stripes on the star position. So anyway, it would look at more on 4n beats away. And there's also this observation is that it will attend more to pitch that form a consonant interval. So if you look at this, it's like fourths, fifths, and if like it's just like 1 degree away, it's like less attend to. And we do normalize it against the frequency. So it's not like, well, these notes just doesn't happen. We do take that into consideration. So we divide it by the occurrence frequency of those things to happen. But still, the model will not look at those, even those are presented. So this is interesting because that does show that these attention mechanism is doing something that at a minimum for is very, very low level. Hopefully, more analysis is needed to see whether these models are actually doing something we do know. But, this is sort of like scrapping the first layer of CNN to see, oh, cool. We see those lines, we see boundary, we see color blocks. So this is like the first layer, but how about, deeper interaction with the models? But in general, we also talk about piano rolls. So I guess here it's just like piano rolls has this like two-dimensional and, this reusable filters ideas. And so the idea between, piano rolls versus sequentialized language-based representation, I guess still we don't really have an idea which one is better. And for me, I feel like it's mixture. It's like part of music is that repetitive structures is actually you can visually feel it, and you do know that those are copy paste, and the octave and the whole music system has that idea of reusable patterns, but at the same time, the transformer, sequentializing things, time music is a time art. Um, at the end of the day. So there's does have like these two axes that is not entirely the same. On the time axis, it's evolving, dynamic, very organic, but on the pitch or frequency axis, there's like things that can be reusable. So I guess the representation part is still unclear what we are heading toward. Second challenge, multimodality. I mean, we didn't talk a lot about this, but think about what's going on with these models. Can AI learn to create music by listening to music rather than reading music? So, think about some of these symbolic music generation models. It's like learning from reading. It's kind of funny, right? It's like, well, has these model ever listened to the music that they are reading? It's just like, well, I just hand you a bunch of sheet music, and then tomorrow, like, well, we have a task, write something in Beethoven style. It doesn't make much sense, right? So, you know, let's learning from listening. So, we talk about, some of the audio models, and, suddenly, well, we train these model with that, train these models that you suddenly generate some music. But at the same time, do they really understand music notation? Do they actually have any connection to that? And how do we sort of like combine these two paradigms of like symbolic versus audio, and the systematic or symbolic domain knowledge versus the auditorial, the music actually you're listening to? Or think about learning from watching, watching some videos. Sometimes that's how we learn, right? We don't learn to play piano, play an instrument by, I don't know, just reading a bunch of score or just listening. We practice, we watch, and of course, practicing is another thing that I forgot to put it here. But that's sort of the multimodal sensory sensory inputs that help you learn. And for now, these models are not doing these. But also, for Gen AI, there's a lot more to do. I mean, we've shown some examples. So, I mean, this is a kind of outdated slide: text, image, video, emotion. I think I will have to skip this. But how do we do real-time interactive compositions? This Shimon, that's interesting because it's actually using the camera to look at the musicians to grab visual cues, and it will send visual cues to the musician, but also take into account visual cues from the musician. So these are kind of things that it's embodied in real life, and you do need those multimodal inputs so that these models, these system can actually work as intended. So that's the second challenge, multimodality. The third challenge is about usability. How can AI music tools be integrated into an artist's creative workflow? So this is getting more and more looked into. So, think about, I always look at this very cool models called Wave Journey, compositional audio creation. So you want to generate some audio, so like a news scripts. But what it does is like two-stage. First, you generate this audio script. So you can look at it, music, background music, volume, lower volume. And it's like, this is the prompt that it wants to use. And then speech foreground, say, welcome to Mars News, blah, blah, blah. And it will have a louder volume, and then you will have different things going on. So this is sort of like a executable script of how you want to create your the music or the audio, the final outputs. And you will use other generative audio models. You music gen to generate music, use audio LDM to generate the sound effects, use Bark to generate the speech. So this is very interesting because it's basically, this the timeline look of your in Premiere Pro. So it's like a perfectly integration into professional creative workflow. But think about other different creative flows. You're using Max and MSP, if you're using other DAW or Ableton Live has like two different views, or you're like DJing. How are these models going to integrate it into your creative workflows? So for music especially, we are so far away from generating these. There are some recent companies or startups doing this, try to do stem by stem generation, but at the same time, The way how we have this session file is like you have different chunks of ideas floating around. It's sort of like looking at, Jacob Collier working with Music FX DJ, is that, well, Music FX DJ can generate a long chunk of audio, but that's not the point. It's like you have different ideas and how do you compose them together. And of course, expand it beyond just the software part or the hardwares. How can we do it better? So Rave is a very interesting model. Did I show this? I show this? Then we can kind of skip. Cool. So this is also another thing that's like, this idea of making audio synthesis real time is some more like a technical innovation in terms of machine learning. But at the same time, because of you make it real time, then you unlock and enable so many interesting applications that you can do by using your hands or gesture, and you get real time reward or feedback, and that make these AI models sort of more like an instrument rather than a standalone something that you don't care. So it now becomes something you can interact with, and that's the hardware part of that. Cool. And so this is like sort of bring us back to this misusable music tools idea. So this is a quote from Tokui. Throughout history, music and technology have often intertwined, with new technology being misused by artists. So, think about turntables, it's of course original, not invented for that, but people figured out that it's a very creative and very expressive ways to express yourself. And so people like it. So, AI is more challenging to misuse because it lacks a physical entity and operates as a black box. So physical entity is the one that I just talked about. If it's a hardware, if it's something that you can interact with, then it becomes something you can work with and try to see how it works. And operate as a black box, this could be a problem, could not be a problem, but at the same time, it's like, can you misuse these kind of, tools? Without deviation from the norm, progress is not possible. Another quote that I like a lot. So that's the third challenge. We are running out of time. Another one is personalization. I think I will skip, but this is a cool collaboration. But I oftentimes think about personalization is like, yes, we want personalization, but through what means? And so, through fine-tuning our own models or through fine-tuning with live inputs, that's something I'm very eager, but I never have time to do it. As I think about, if you're an artist on stage, and can you sort of like train a model on life while you're playing, that model is being trained and being improved over time. Or think about, the separation model is like, where we have all these separation model that can do, nice on your recording. But what if, now we have totally new ensembles or an instrument you never heard of? When you set up the stage, you will test the microphone, you will test the speaker. So you do get like a tiny, 10 seconds, 30-second recording of that. Can we just use that recording and, fine tune our music, separation model? Then later we can just run it on the fly. So, so these kind of, ease of personalization for artists. And of course, Python scripting, that's definitely not what we want, or, friendly user interface, or something that's even more tangible, or, something that you can touch with. Can we do better, basically? And this is another very interesting idea, overfitting versus distortion. So, will overfitting become a new music expression, the distortion of AI music? So, in machine learning, people oftentimes like hate overfitting. It's like, we don't want overfitting. How do we alleviate overfitting? How do we get rid of overfitting? But, think about music, then, distortion. Initially, people don't like it. People hate those, distorted sounds. But in the end, that's what defines this kind of sounds, right? And, overfitting, could it become the distortion of AI music? What are some of the unique sounds characteristic of AI music? And that's something definitely worth thinking about. I will skip this. And of course, the last one is creativity. I guess, can AI ever be creative? How can AI augment human creativity? The curse of machine learning is that if you think deep into it, is that AI is only as good as the data it learns from, at least from the machine learning paradigm. Of course, there's also other paradigm that's beyond machine learning. Um, but machine learning models are trained to approximate the same distributions. But it's sort of contradicted to the idea to extrapolate or think out of the box. So can AI ever be creative? So there's actually some AI work that's trying to do this. So the idea of this creative adversarial network is very cool. Is that, we have this discriminator. This discriminator is trying to do artist classification. Now, the generator, it do two things. It wants to generate real art, you know, realistic art, but at the same time cannot be categorized into one of the artists. So you see the point? Now we want to still generate something that's art, but at the same time, we want it to be, well, at the boundary of known artists. And that's how they train this model. And this is what I get, right? That's super cool because, these are, essentially, well, these arts, I mean, definitely consider art to some extent. And at the same time, it's sort of like trying to navigate in between the boundaries of, artworks. And, these are some of the best samples. These are random samples. These are some of the best samples. So, I guess there are so many different definition of creativity. There's, extrapolate, we will see later. So, creativity is the ability to come up with ideas and artifacts that are new, surprising, and valuable. And there's some like formal definition of creativity, combinatorial creativity, exploratory creativity, also transformative creativity. And now AI is very good at combinatory creativity. Michigan Space Wolverine, likely there's no this kind of image online, but these AI models can do it. And this is another thing. I grabbed this from an MIT talk. So that's why there's an MIT space fever. But think about transformative creativity, then a lot of the true creativity points is not being created this way. So I guess we are so far away from reaching that in terms of computational creativity. Of course, John Cage, 433. This is another quote. Creativity is allowing yourself to make mistakes, artists knowing which ones to keep. So that's again, creativity versus art is not the same. This is by the Scott Adams. If you'd like to think about this more philosophical, but also some technical things, this is a very, very good TED Talk on can computer create art. There's also another version of TED Talks like much longer. So Aaron is the VP at Adobe, an expert in computer graphics. Very interesting. Cool. So these are challenges, but at the same time, opportunities, representation, multimodality, usability, personalization, and creativity. And we are so far away from getting all these done for AI music. So exciting time to work on it, and things will evolve over time. Final thoughts? There's another course next semester. So Gen AI for music and audio creation. So we will dive deeper into Gen AI. So we touch on that, but we didn't dive into that. This is more like a survey on all the different perspective, but if you're interesting, that's a deeper, more advanced courses that will dive deeper into hands-on assignments. Final thoughts. This is the true final thoughts. I guess this kind of very evolving, fastly evolving field is that oftentimes course is the last chance you will get structured knowledge, and after that is just like randomly grabbing so many different knowledge from different sources, and you have to connect yourself. So I guess that's part of life, and being in college, I think the higher education is trying to have you learn about this, navigating through these unstructured knowledge, but how do you turn that into structured knowledge to consolidate your understanding of a field and how to explore it? And, just the teachers, we organize knowledge for you. And, engineers, you learn about these knowledge and apply these knowledge. You, for artists, you challenge this knowledge, but, research is about, creating knowledge. So this is like different perspective. And, at the end of the day, knowledge is what we are looking for. Final slide. I guess I like this slide because it's like oftentimes when I finish a course, it's like I feel like I'm so, so naive. There are so many stuff over there. Now you are at the top of the hill, but only until then, there are so many other hills, other fields, other things that people haven't explored. So now you are, still the vast is to be explored, but you now under higher perspective, now you see how they connected to one another. Cool. Um, Super rushed, but hopefully inspire some of the ideas. Cool.
Is
Yeah.
The next semester course, is it like pretty similar to like this semester's course?
I would likely transform it so it will be much advanced, I guess. Yeah. So it will dive deeper into the Gen AI part. So think about transformer, think about diffusion, think about GN and stuff. So assignments would dive deeper into that. And we didn't even touch on all these deep generative models. I mean, we talk about those easy AI models, which you might already know, but deep generative model is another paradigm. Cool.